Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Right to Know, brought to you by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. Today I'll be your host, and with me as always is my co-host, Mary Lotze. Good evening, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm wonderful, Andrew. Thank you.
Excellent. And today's topic for the show is a discussion about the voters' outlook, crisis in America. Our guest this evening is Chairman of the Fitchburg Republican City Committee, Dr. John Strang. How you doing, John?
I'm fine, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for joining us again.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Just for some opening remarks, do they see what we see? Responses from liberal Democrats and progressives to the crisis in America. Now, John, you've been on the show many times. You are the chairman of the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. You do have your PhD. But what are some of your professional credentials that will make your assessment more profound regarding these historical trends and human reactions to changes in crisis?
Well, my background's in philosophy and in history, and I guess those are maybe sufficient backgrounds in terms of trying to understand what's happening now. We're living in exceptional times. But if you were a student of history, you'd know that such times have been endured by other countries in the 20th century. And perhaps that's something that will come up in the course of our discussion.
Excellent. Now, John, consistently we hear from people who we meet in our political travels who believe that America is not only in a deep decline, but almost at a crisis point in history. They cite out-of-control inflation, national debt that's considered a national security threat, failing economy, increase in crime in our cities and on our streets, where criminals who get caught go free within minutes of their detainment. We lost our energy independence as a nation. We have open borders where we have no idea who's coming into this country or for what reason. And it seems also that, just recently they're giving debit cards to these, illegal migrants worth $10,000 per person. The presence of the migrants in every community impacting the communities, healthcare system, school, safety of the residents, opportunities and availability for emergency shelters, lodging if needed, illegal drugs being pushed on our streets by South and Central American cartels, human trafficking, primarily women and children, decline in our national security where we allow a spy balloon flying over our lands unabated, a loss of esteem of the United States and the world standing, and I could go on, but just recently, it hasn't been determined to be a cyber attack, but we just recently, thousands of people across the country lost their cell phone service. I, for one, was one of them, and just recently I learned from an associate of mine, there were thousands of people who have had their tax returns, people filing false tax returns. Thousands of people, just that we know of right now. One individual, an accountant that I know, has 7,000 people just in his data system that he knows that people have filed false tax returns. So obviously, we could go on forever. We have talked together with many others and expressed the same concerns. Our children, our grandchildren will never be able to afford live the life that we had. I call this nation in crisis. What would you call it?
Well, that's exactly right. It's incomparable in our history. We've never had any situation like this. The closest was in the decades before the Civil War, where there was clearly a demarcation between one part of the country that was in favor of slaveholding and another part, and states' rights, and another part that was opposed to it, although lukewarm. As we know, eventually that came to a civil war. But this is a more insidious rift that we're experiencing right now. We'll probably get into that in detail as we continue.
So, just bringing up the fact that, well, what was the saying? Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned?
Right.
Is that what we're facing here? It's the seemingly endless list of national critical issues, concerns, and problems. Are there any specific issues that you can hone in on to discuss that seems more concerning?
Well, one issue certainly we'll get into is education in the broadest sense of the word, not simply going to schools, but all of our levels of education have been corrupted. This is not a sudden event. It's been building for many years. And beyond that, education in a broader sense, not talking here about actually going to institutions, but the education of the citizen. The requirement that a citizen, an American citizen, should know certain things, should have certain experience. When we reflect on what it is to make a citizen, actually, we're very little called upon to exhibit citizenship.
Right.
The extent of our commitment typically is voting or serving on a jury occasionally. It used to be the case that young men in particular would acquire some of the foundations of citizenship by military service. But of course, the draft was eliminated in 1975, so that avenue is out too. And the result is we have a public that is increasingly ignorant of what citizenship means, and they're not aware of the tremendous threats which we are facing as American citizens because of their ignorance. So that's one area that I would like to focus on, maybe at a later point in our discussions here in more detail.
Well, John, how did we get to this point? I mean, Andrew's list is certainly not. It's not the end of the list. You could go on and on and on, etc.
Yeah.
You know, every aspect of our society, our family, our religious culture, our traditions is being impacted negatively. How did we get here?
It's been long building. In another context, I spoke to another audience about the role that Marxism has played in our education, in our schools of education. Essentially, the focus, from my perspective, begins at least 50 or 60 years ago, when many individuals in academia, of course, academics have increasingly been of the left. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to find, very rare to find a conservative academic, as I was. But academics of the left were frustrated beginning in the 1950s and 60s that their ideas could not be implemented. And an Italian philosopher named Antonio Gramsci proposed what he called the march through the institutions. In other words, he says the left in the West cannot defeat the United States. It's not powerful enough in a war. Soviet Union then would not be powerful enough. But we can gradually work at bringing Marxism and Marxist tenets into our educational system. So this concept of a long march through the institutions was really the foundation of what we're witnessing now.
Did they really hone in on the education system, knowing it's starting from the ground up, the children up?
It was a very gradual assessment. Like the Chinese, the Chinese communists are proud of the fact that they can think in decades, not just in years. Yeah. Americans aren't used to that. No. We're not used to responding to that.
Well, I mean, when I was in college, I was going to be a secondary education major, mm-hmm. Specializing in English and history.
Yes.
And one of the required reading was Dewey. And just reading Dewey, it just reeks of Marxism. Yeah. It reeks of,
exactly. Dewey, in addition to being a Marxist, was also a wretched writer. He's probably the most boring philosopher
I wholeheartedly agree. And unfortunately, but that was a required reading. Sure. Yeah. And they were spoon feeding it, into these future educators.
That's right. That's right.
And it's happening not just in the public colleges and universities, it's happening in the private colleges, even the Catholic or Jesuit colleges.
Right. Sometimes it's even worse in the private in the private colleges. You look at Harvard. You look at
bastions.
They're to find a conservative there. You'd be hard pressed to find any conservative in a private Ivy League.
It's easy to imagine that this is a conspiracy. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that enough intellectuals were influenced and continued to be influenced that they could gradually change the mindset of what up until the 1960s was a reasonably, moderately conservative culture in America.
So you don't look at it as a conspiracy. You think it's just that these people were dissatisfied, they liked things better. honorably, ethically, they thought that way, and they just started teaching modern math, we'll say. And I'm just using modern math as a metaphor of teaching different.
Marxism, in a sense, in education, piggybacked on legitimate problems in American society in the 1960s. It was true that black people were mistreated. They were deprived of their rights as citizens. That was the truth. But that was simply one, although a major issue, that they made use of, that the left made use of. And it's gone well beyond that. I think that any honest black person in America today has to admit that they've passed beyond the Jim Crow period.
Well, I don't know.
But you have a lot of dishonest
I don't know if that's true, because we've got reparations, which is a topic for a different time.
Yeah, but that's driven specifically by a Marxist mindset.
But you also want to consider that the people who were pro-segregation were the Democrats.
That's right. That's right.
You know, or what they were now referred to, you know, kind of hiding the truth.
And if we had
the Dixiecrats.
If we had a citizenship that was educated historically, they would know that. But it's astonishing, maybe not astonishing, but it still is striking how many people on the left are not aware of the real impact of the Democrat Party on these issues. They're the ones who were slaveholders. They're the ones who wanted Jim Crow laws. It was the Republicans who changed that.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and I was actually watching a documentary about Frederick Douglass.
Right.
And they forgot to mention that, oh yeah, by the way, he was a Republican.
Right.
This actually gets right into the sort of my next question is, how is it that so many, and I'll use the term voters, but people, Americans, see things so differently than the three of us?
Well,
and the three of us, again, I use as just sort of the attitude of the conservative, the average Republican. Well, I shouldn't say the average Republican, the average conservative who could be Republican or an unenrolled voter. Why do people not see what we see?
The three of us, for one thing, we're not spring chickens anymore. We were educated. No
I take great offense to that.
We were educated in a slightly different environment. The left was present, but it wasn't as over-present, as omnipresent as it is now. Yeah. Young people increasingly, they don't learn these basic things. And here, I had a couple of things I ran off. Recently, the history scores. This is actually last May. There was a study that showed that history and civics scores across the nation plummeted to record lows amongst 8th graders. Just 13% of them performed at or above the proficient level in U.S. history. The drop in scores reflects a de-emphasis on civics and history over the last decade, as other subjects, read woke subjects, have been given priority. So this is, as I say, it's something that's been going on continuously. The result is the product you get out of this is a teacher, so-called, who himself or herself doesn't know much about our history. This has always been a problem in the schools of education. The people who teach history in high schools typically don't know that much history. The schools of education overemphasize the actual activity of education. And the result is that they produce an individual who imagines they can teach any subject, even if they're not proficient or even know the basics in it. Anyway, these recent studies show that civics and history are not being taught, so it's no surprise that young people wouldn't know much about them. And in a country like ours, as the Founding Fathers recognized, you have to have a means of teaching citizenship to the people. Military service is one form that's no longer available because the draft was done away with in 1975. Apart from that, there are relatively few things that we're called upon to exercise as citizens. We vote occasionally, we have occasional jury duty, and that's about it.
I think even jury duty, you would know this. It seems like all trials seem to be settled out of court.
Well, I mean, statistically, 95% of the cases that are on for trial, wind up settling. It's very rare now. But a lot of people don't know. They don't register to vote because they don't want to be called for jury duty. But they no longer pick the names from the list of voters. They now pick the names out of the registry, the motor vehicle registry.
Really?
So it doesn't matter if you're registered to vote anymore. You know, that's where you get your name.
But even citing, John, you cited one of the things that you could call upon citizenship to do is to vote. And
Right.
yet so many people don't know the candidates.
Right.
They don't understand the issues. And you and I both work the polls on Election Day. And it's astonishing to find people coming up to you as a poll worker and asking you some of the most basic questions,
Right.
like, what's a Republican and what's a Democrat?
Right.
I wanted to find so-and-so's name on the ballot, but it's not here. Well, that's
Right.
because the so-and-so is a Republican and you're a registered Democrat. You can't pull that ballot in the primary.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that-
Yep, I don't disagree. The threat I see right now is a citizen who really doesn't know and doesn't care about his citizenship, because that's playing right into the hands of of Marxism.
So you once mentioned that the voting population is basically made up of 3 different population groups with their own points of view: progressives, moderates, conservatives. How does this break down and mesh with the political party structure that we currently have, Republicans, Democrats, and unenrolled?
Well, progressives is the word that's come increasingly into use. We used to refer to liberals. You know, liberals are people on the left, although it didn't mean the far left of the Democrat Party. But even within our own lifetimes, within probably the last 10 or 20 years, it's changed. There was a quote by David Horowitz, who himself is the son of committed communists, who were so disappointed by the revelation that Stalin did in fact have gulags, and he mistreated millions of his people because they thought that was just Western propaganda. David Horowitz said that inside every progressive is a totalitarian screaming to get out. That's very true. The mindset of progressives, probably, they will not admit this themselves, but the mindset of progressives is not to discuss differences with conservatives, but to silence conservatives. This is brought out just in a, for example, in a statistic I just saw, and this came out like a few days ago. I don't know if I have the sheet in front of me. Yes. A recent Rasmussen poll showed that 78% of Democrats want Trump removed from the ballot. They don't want to discuss anything with Trump. They don't want their candidate to discuss anything with Trump. They want to make sure that Trump does not appear on the ballot because they're afraid that he would be elected. This is a totalitarian mindset. And this is perhaps the most difficult thing for ordinary American citizens to get into their heads. We are not dealing with a normal opposition in America anymore. In Harry Truman's time, Truman could talk with Republicans and Democrats. Adlai Stevenson could talk with Republicans and Democrats. And that remained true for several generations.
Just look at Ronald Reagan and
Exactly.
Tip O'Neill.
Tip O'Neill, precisely. Tip O'Neill is a Democrat, as liberal a Democrat as you would find, was willing and indeed enjoyed talking with Ronald Reagan. They liked each other's company. But now we're in something radically different, and we really cannot get our heads around it because it is so different. The notion that your opposition, the progressives, and I'm not claiming that they represent a huge percentage, but they represent a significant percentage of our overall population, voting population. The notion that 78%, that's almost 8 out of 10 of them, want to debar Trump from the ballot. They don't want to discuss anything. And that's just one piece of evidence. We find all kinds of pieces of evidence where indeed these high-tech companies that have been in collusion with the government to prevent conservative viewpoints from being heard. That's clear evidence, you know. And you can find much more. The attitude they have is not just against Trump personally, it's against conservatives.
Right, what he stands
and the
for.
organs of conservatism.
Just to put it in a local level for our viewers who may think that we're talking articles and statistics and intelligentsia and, you know, erudite ratings. We're not. We were doing a standout a couple of weeks ago, and a man pulled his car right into the parking lot and engaged one of the individuals standing out. And he didn't engage him in, geez, I really want to know why you're thinking this way and supporting these candidates. He just lambasted him with every four-letter word you could think of, calling him personally this, and this. So to go to your point, I mean, they try to silence you without even discussing why do you think that.
Silencing you is what they want to do. And the actual issue, maybe this is what you were going to get into next, Andrew, is if progressives see any crisis, like certainly conservatives do, and moderates do, how do they respond? This, I think, is key. If you look at the actual issues, and I'll just take a sampling of the list that you gave at the beginning here. Illegal immigration. What is their attitude toward illegal immigration? Progressives accept it. In fact, they don't even want to call it illegal immigration. They want to call it undocumented migrants. Well, why are they undocumented? Because they're illegal, right? They accept lax border control. Now, the control of your border should be pretty basic. It's an indication of your sovereignty, your national sovereignty. If you don't care about your border, what does that say about your conception of your national sovereignty? Well, they're indifferent to national sovereignty. Progressives, in fact, many progressives will openly admit that they think that the nation state is obsolete, an obsolete concept. They don't want a nation state. They don't want a strong national sovereignty. What would they replace it with? Well, global government of some form. Would that be a democratically elected government, do you think? I doubt it.
Yeah.
Because they've always been attracted to fiats exercised by officials. They're in sympathy with that. What about our national debt? How do progressives look at that? Well, they deny it, as the Biden administration tried to deny it with its hokey Bidenomics. And it stopped using that expression pretty much because no one accepts it. What about the policies that have infected our educational system, for example, and some businesses, woke policies, DEI, okay? DEI policies are rampant in education, in business, in many businesses, not all of them obviously, but in many of the most powerful, and even in the military. Now, why is it we have, for example, a decline in the willingness of recruits to enter, or prospective recruits to enter the armed services? All of the armed services are experiencing losses. They're not fulfilling their annual goals. Why is this? Well, the presence of these DEI policies, these woke policies.
And probably for the same reason as we have people who are reluctant to join the police forces and the fire departments.
Exactly.
Because if they step over a line in some minute way, their career is over.
Another example of how progressives are responding to the crisis is they are supporting essentially, as we see around us, a two-tiered justice system. People on the left are treated differently and much more severely than people on the right. This is not just true of Trump. It's true across the board. Now, if they were really honest, humane, moral people, how could they do that? How could you support a two-tier justice system? They support the mainstream media overwhelmingly, and we know the mainstream media is itself of the left. And they also, progressives, oppose guarantees in behalf of fair elections. We know that for many years, progressives have opposed, for example, having to show an ID when you vote, like a driver's license. Nearly every country in the earth has some form of identification before you can go vote. The progressives come up with the most cockamamie reasons why you can't do this. It's too difficult for people, which is nonsense. These are just illustrations of the problem. And I would say that we have to get our heads into this, that the opponents we have today, and even though not all Democrats are progressives, they are guided by progressive policies. The opponents we have today are people who are fundamentally opposed to our system of government.
In our last 2 minutes, how do we change this?
Well, we have to do what we're doing, but better and harder. There's been a growth, certainly, in perception of ordinary people who ordinarily don't get into politics, of the need to become political. You know, there's conservatives historically have not tended to become active in politics. The major focal point for most conservative activity in our history has been business. And until recently, you could assume that if a person is a professional businessman or businesswoman, he or she would tend to vote and be conservative. That's been undermined, again, because in the woke technological businesses, we see that people in these areas are perfectly willing to cooperate with progressive propaganda, essentially, and implement it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see where we could change our educational system. I don't see where that's going to change. I don't even see a move to change the educational system.
No, I think that my attitude is, and I've come into, I don't want to say conflict, but disagreement with certain local people. For example, we've had candidates running for the local school board, and from my perspective, it's a waste of effort. I don't think the school boards, the role of the teachers' unions, the role of the left in our educational system is going to change. So my recommendation would be to withdraw your child and teach the child either in homeschooling or in some other collaborative effort outside of the public school system. You may find occasional public schools that work and that are fair in their education, but that's the exception. We have to realize we have a true enemy in front of us. The progressive movement is not an opposition you can talk with and reason with. They want to eliminate you. Just as they want to eliminate Trump. It's all of a piece.
It's the cancel culture is taking over.
If they can't keep the Trump off the ballot, they're going to bankrupt him. One or the other.
One or the other.
So he won't be able to run.
Right.
Yeah. John, thank you for joining us tonight on Your Right to Know and being with us. We thank you, viewers, for watching Your Right to Know and for following our program. And as we sit here tonight, we'd like to leave you with the fact that your city or town local Republican committee is your only grassroots organization that holds firm to our constitutional rights and our traditional values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's not guaranteed, but we have the opportunity to pursue it. We encourage you to join us. We meet the second Thursday of every month at the British American Club at 7 o'clock. You just have to come in and join us. We believe that the GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity for people, for all people, and we always stand for freedom. We thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might.